All right, everyone, we're going to get started. Thank you so much for joining us today for this future forecasting conversation about social changes that we are seeing. My name is Dr. Kristen Donnelly, and I am one of the good doctors of Abbey Research. You'll be meeting Dr. Erin Hinson in a few minutes if you don't already know us. Couple quick things to say before we start. First of all, the chat feature here on Zoom will be open this whole time if you've got questions. There'll be time at the end, but also you can get a hold of us anytime, pretty much, easily, and ask your questions from there. As the world keeps changing, we're aware that this is a lot coming at you and us and everything, and we want to provide guidance as best we can. A lot of today is going to come from our experience in working in and studying conflict regions around the world, because we've seen what war looks like and we think we're in one right now. And so we want to kind of craft some of the responses around that. So that's kind of the overall philosophy of what's going on in our brains as we're presenting this. So where are we going? First, we're going to really quick introduce ourselves so that you know who we are. Then we're going to talk about the short-term social changes, like the stuff that's been happening right now, and that is maybe changing every minute of every day. But then we're going to spend most of the time talking about the longer-term things, the things that we think are going to shift kind of long-term in the culture, especially taking some lessons specifically from Northern Ireland, which is our academic expertise. And then also some really basic tips, but also we think some really important ones on managing social changes around this. And next week, if you want to join us for the third part of our webinar, last week we talked about mechanics of business. Next week, we're going to talk about emotional and mental health around this. So this is kind of the bridge between those two things, both the social and societal changes, but also how they impact humans. And we'll be talking about all those things as we go on. So who are we? I am Dr. Kristen. I have the glasses.
And I'm Dr. Erin Hinson, and I have the curly hair.
And Erin's always wearing earrings in all of our stuff, so you can also tell us apart that way.
I was going to say, I have glasses on today, but you can't see me. But I always have the curly hair.
True statement, except this one time that we'll tell a story about later. We are both PhDs in social science, and we met a little under 9 years ago, working in Northern Ireland and studying and getting our postgrads degrees. Between the two of us, we have about 30 years of combined research and business experience. I am, as well as involved in the Good Doctors, I am the chief operating officer of our parent company, which is my family manufacturing firm, and have been part of a family business since we bought the business when I was 7. And really been thinking about that. Dr. Erin has extensive experience in management, in retail, and working with the general public. God bless her. We believe in hard conversations that are also healing and not punitive. How do humans work together, and how do we make sense of this really complicated world that we create as people, because we are complicated people. So we say that we're saving the workplace one hard and healing conversation at a time. This extends to nonprofits and to college campuses and to families, if we're completely honest. The skills that we teach extend to all groups of people. And we're trained to study peoples and cultures. So this is kind of where this is all coming from. So give you a brief overview. We're going to start with some really generic stuff, and then we move to specific stuff, and then we always end with the action. That's one of our brand promises to you, is that these 3 things will happen today and in every time you join us. So let's get down to some basics. First of all, let's have a quick conversation about the word normal. We hear it a lot right now in news conferences and even in social media and in conversations. I even catch myself using it. We all want to know when things are going to get back to normal. We are here to tell you that there is no going back to normal. Everything has changed now. We will establish new normals and new routines that may look quite a bit like what it was before, but we're never going to have a time where this didn't happen. We are never going to be people that don't remember where we were during the pandemic and don't have stories about how things hurt and how they were hard and how I were scared and I didn't know what was going on, how difficult it was to not see a new baby or to be able to be there with family. We will always carry this experience with us. And so we'll create new normals, but there is no going back to normal. We do need routines because routines and patterns are really essential for humans. We need to exist kind of in patterned behavior, or we kind of start flailing. Even those of us who say we love chaos, like my brother says all the time that he thrives in chaos. Like, boy still has routines and he still has patterns of behavior and he still has things that he does, even if he loves chaos. So a big part of why everything is so emotional right now for so many people is that all of our routines have been turned on their head. Even those of us who are still going into the office every day because we have essential positions, nothing feels the same. Everything is odd. And that is really difficult for our emotional capacities as human beings. As we rebuild our personal routines and our personal new normal, at the end of this, we will also be rebuilding our cultural routines and our cultural new normals. So for instance, a huge part of the American cultural routine is our sports schedules. When everyone, this is all over and we all gather and, you know, whatever, and we all start doing sports again, it's going to feel really, really weird to be possibly playing baseball in November. We're supposed to stop baseball in October, or maybe we don't have baseball this summer at all. Well, that's wrong. Summer should always include baseball. You know, it's just going to be very strange. That's one example. Also, just a really quick thought to throw out there. We spend a lot of time here at Abbey Research talking about generations. And this is a great time to remember that every generation is going to handle this differently in both short and long term. You've got young kids out of school that are going to remember this, how it was really hard to not see their friends, or you're going to have young children who were in abusive homes who are now being forced to live in those abusive homes with no break. There are children that are going to remember this as a time of lacking. They didn't know where food was coming from. Their parents were really stressed. And there are other children that may remember this as a vacation. That's very different. Then you're going to have, you know, the people who are in college right now that maybe watched their friends go to spring break and spread this further. You have millennials who have lost their jobs or having to close down their own businesses. You have boomers who are doing the same thing. It's all a little bit different and we're all carrying different things. So as we rebuild new normals, we're going to have to keep that in mind as well. So the short-term social changes, you guys are already seeing these. We're going to fly through them really quick. So obviously we have virtual connections. We have virtual happy hours. We're having conversation over Zoom meetings. Although Erin and I have been meeting over Zoom for 2 years now. For some of you, this is really new. The canceled events are a really big thing. I keep hearing, you know, oh, I know it's a first world problem that my birthday party was canceled. It's not. It is a thing to grieve over. One of our best friends actually was supposed to get married this coming Saturday. We were supposed to be in Ireland right now for it. And she's got a wonderful perspective and she's trying really hard to keep it, as she says, in perspective. She's a physician in the medical field as well. And she'll say, like, I know I shouldn't be making such a big deal. And we'll all come back on WhatsApp and be like, no, it was your wedding. Like, you are allowed to be upset and sad. This is a grieving process and we're all going to have that. So, like, as we go forward from here, we think that one of the first things that's going to start happening as we all start leaving the house again is that there's going to be a lot of really strange interactions in like normal daily life. I'm using air quotes. But like the first time that you're in a grocery store and somebody sneezes and they don't cover their mouth, like someone's going to have a panic attack. There's a lot of going to be weirdness and kind of all that stuff. We're also missing those like just kind of day-to-day interactions where you like wave to a neighbor and like go over and talk to them. You can't do that right now. So that's a really change. Everybody's got a lot of surging emotions. I read a kind of acknowledgement about like one of the ways our endocrine system might be responding to this, which is that we cannot do fight or flight. We can't fight the disease. We can't get away from it. And so our system is playing dead, which is why we're all so tired. And one of the things that's coming, so that kind of level of social anxiety and fear and confusion and grief is going to lead to mental health issues. We need to be aware of this. We need to be aware that domestic violence is spiking. We need to be aware that suicide ideation is spiking. We need to be aware that this is a thing that is happening and will continue to happen. The prolonged isolation is bad for us. We as humans are not meant to be alone. And so for people who are self-isolating or quarantining completely alone in their house, this is going to be really, really difficult. Even for those of us that have one or two other people, this is not how we're meant to live. And so this is really wrong. The whiplash that we talked about is absolutely making people feel unstable. I covered that in the last slide. And so that's something that's going to keep happening, especially as we kind of live in hope, like, oh, maybe this will end, and then it doesn't. And we build new routines that don't really work anymore. This is not going to go away quickly.
So when we think about these immediate short-term social changes, like all the ones that we've seen in the last 3 weeks and the last month that Dr. Kristen just covered, we kind of wanted to follow, like, what happens if we pull that thread, and what kind of long-term changes are we going to see in the coming months and years? Because realistically, we're looking at this dominating probably the rest of our year. Returning to some form of normality is unlikely to happen until we have a viable vaccine for this virus, until we can find a way to control it that is not severely limiting people's mobility. This is a long-term project. So one of the things that we think we're going to see is a change in the relationship with our family and our friends and our community members. And this can happen in a lot of ways, depending on our responses and their responses. One of the things we've seen from our work in conflict zones is a strain on familial and personal relationships, depending on how people respond to this trauma. And it's going to bring a lot of people together. And I think we're seeing that in the ways people are being creative with these physical distancing limitations. But it's going to also damage some relationships, and beware of that potential for your friends and family. Excuse me, I have like allergies today, and if I lose my voice, I'm going to try and soldier through. But that's going to be one of the big long-term changes we think we're going to see. So obviously a change in travel patterns. We've all seen it with our limitations for work, but also for leisure and access to locations. I was talking to my brother yesterday about the impact on the tourism industry and how we do global tourism, and that this could drastically change the way we do global tourism. Are we really going to go back to the way we traveled around the world, to the way people used various modes of transportations like planes and trains and cruise ships? Is that going to go back to some sort of normal after this? Social support systems are certainly changing. The more marginalized and disenfranchised groups around the globe are going to be harder hit by this than any of us. So you're, if you can help out organizations during this time, if you're in that position, please try and do so. But certainly even the way government programs work, and possibly could change the way healthcare works. Dr. Kristen already talked about this, but I think an increase in emotional responses, and I've really tried to think about the long-term effect, and Dr. Kristen used that example of a person having a panic attack in a grocery store, or, what if you see someone in a restaurant once we're all allowed to go back out to restaurants, and they cough, and then they touch their silverware, or they touch something that's communally used. A lot of people are going to experience trauma in different ways, and you won't know what somebody else's trauma has been from this pandemic, and we won't know how people are going to respond to it. But these are things that we could see, a mistrust of others. We could see increases in agoraphobia and germophobia, particularly moving forward. Certainly, we could see in some places an increased role of government and police, surveillance and monitoring. We're seeing this in places that are having to enforce the physical distancing rules and the rules of the shutdown. I know there was a party broken up in New Jersey over the weekend where 47 people were meeting, and the governor of New Jersey, who is a personal hero of Dr. Kristen's and mine at this stage, railed on social media about it. So he had somewhere he needed to vent that anger and that fear at people not adhering to the rules. And as Dr. Kristen also mentioned, right, we're going to see an increase in numbers of suicides, self-harm, substance abuse, physical abuse, and violence. We've seen articles come out around domestic violence and abuse at home as well. So that all of those numbers could increase. And they certainly won't, these issues won't go away once we have some kind of management or control on the virus as well, which is one thing we're going to really hammer home in this as we go forward. So that was a whole lot of not nice things, but it's really important that we try and think about ways that we can manage it going forward. Everybody just take a deep breath as we're on this webinar together. And we'll, try and figure out some ways that we can start coping with this and start planning for this now.
So one of the things, as we said, that we have spent a lot of our time kind of studying and looking at is the long-term, was 30 years of and even longer, armed conflict in Northern Ireland. And so we think that there's a lot that we can learn from this. And so here are kind of 4 things, and we'll unpack them a little bit now, but also later, kind of learning from conflict-heavy societies how we can respond. So the first thing is that kind of a little bit what we've talked about with the normal, like I guess we can all stop pining in a way for a normal that's not going to happen anymore. We're going to stop. We need to think about adjusting and being adaptable to create new senses of normality as things keep changing. So like all the people right now that are homeschooling their kids and creating schedules for their kids because their kids are used to that, that's a really great example. Like, sure, that like they don't have like math at 2:30 anymore, but why not tell them to do their math work at 2:30? Like things like that. That's really helpful.
And we've already hinted at this a little bit, but one of the biggest lessons we got from Northern Ireland was that trauma lasts a lot longer. And this may seem obvious, but it's, I think as humans, we need to kind of put ends on things or end dates on things. And we saw a lot of this in Northern Ireland when the conflict, quote unquote, ended. When the peace deal was signed, there was a lot of push. And I think this is going to be a really big difference between kind of the narrative that governments might push and what we need to consider on a societal level. So the government in Northern Ireland was like, we have reached an agreement. We're going to move forward. We are now a peaceful society. Look brightly towards the future. Let's develop our economy. Let's develop our tourism. All of those were really good things and important things. But what they didn't develop was any form of process for dealing with long-lasting generational trauma. And so all of these societal changes, for however long they last for us, it's when we are allowed to, go back to some sort of normality, we're not going to forget that this happened to us. I mean, I'm thinking a lot about kind of our societal response to 9/11 and how many changes that happened because of 9/11 that we accepted moving forward. And our life didn't go back to what it was before 9/11 happened. And certainly it is not going to go back to normal after this ends, whenever it ends, in quotes.
This is really brief, but there's a real difference between taking, doing a post-mortem on a crisis and blaming people for it. People taking responsibility or assigning responsibility and assigning blame. And that's a little bit, we're going to unpack that a little bit more next time, but there are people that screwed up right now in this process, but holding on to blame for that or holding on to anger. I struggle with this. I definitely want to yell at spring breakers all the time on Twitter. But holding on to that isn't productive. And so figuring out how to navigate that in and of yourself.
This is also going to be one of the harder things to grapple with societally, that everyone is a victim and that we will have to provide support for everyone, even the spring breakers. And it'll be very tempting to build a hierarchy of victimhood. And certainly there will be people who will have suffered disproportionately during this pandemic. And so we should and have to consider the needs of those people who have prolonged unemployment, lost loved ones, suffered an illness themselves, the people without homes, the people without food. All of that will be disproportionately impacted on those people. But we also need to consider that we will have all experienced trauma on some level. And so we will really have to, we hope, think about a way to build a comprehensive support mechanism and what that could possibly look like on a societal level or even on a real local level for maybe just your community or your group of family and friends.
So what can we do right now? We can be gentle with ourselves and practice this attitude of non-judgment, both for yourself and others, because like y'all, we are all struggling. Everything is hard. And that's not a shameful thing. That's just life.
We've seen this a lot already. It'll be interesting to see how we continue this connection going forward. But reach out and stay connected. Make plans with friends and family. One of the things that's been really important for me has been my yoga teacher has moved our classes online. And so that's helped create like a sense of routine, even for me. I now have my same yoga class on Tuesday evenings. I have one on Sunday afternoons. We'll try and create a new routine so that there's some sense of even just telling time, because time has ceased to exist.
Yeah. And when you're not sure how to process, talk about it. Talk about how to do this. Just to remember, I keep singing High School Musical, we are all in this together and none of us really know what we're doing. And so reminding yourself of that could be really, really healthy.
So again, finding that stability and finding that routine is important, but it's also important to be flexible about it. We can't establish hard routines now. Every couple of days we get new guidances, new information, new restrictions, new limitations. So being able to be adaptable as well and not putting pressure on yourself, I think that goes back to practicing grace with yourself and others. We're all in this whirlpool at the same time. But realizing that, even if you set a routine and it gets broken, that's okay too.
And we are all imperfect people. It's one of Dr. Aaron's very favorite phrases, and she has taught me a lot about it. But none of us are good at this because there is no good at this. So you learn by doing. You learn what works for you on a given day. I'm giving myself 5-minute chunks. If something doesn't feel like it's bringing comfort, I stop it in some ways. And if something is working and keeping me distracted, then I keep doing it for a while. And that's as much as I can kind of manage in my free time as possible right now. But we learn by doing. It's how we're going to get through this.
And finally, we talked about offline when we were planning this webinar, kind of this idea of being productive or constructive rather than destructive. And it's really hard to manage those different emotions. And productivity doesn't mean making things. And we put on it doesn't necessarily mean, it means what it means to you. And if being productive for you, if being constructive is meditating or crying or, making breakfast for your family or learning how to sew, those are all things that can be productive for you in an emotionally rehabilitative way. This is a great time to start a diary. One of my really good friends wrote a diary all throughout the conflict in Northern Ireland, and it's a fascinating way to keep track of your emotions and your thoughts and your feelings and to have a place to put them. But it'll also be, I think, interesting for all of us to look back on this time and see what life was like and the things that you might not remember as you're going through this traumatic time. But be creative in what being productive means to you. And there's a whole lot of people out there giving advice and putting a lot of pressure on all of us to be productive in a certain way. But that is whatever it looks like to you at whatever given moment of whatever given day.
So here's how we're going to try to help in the next little bit. You can join our YouTube watch parties. We have so many videos. We've been watching television together and with folks on our YouTube channel for a couple years now. So there's lots of that. In the next couple weeks, we're going to be releasing our happy playlists and how we're coping and what tips we kind of have for what's worked for us. So keep your eye on that, which will include me talking extensively about the iPhone game Best Fiends, which is one of the ways I'm keeping sane right now. We've also got some white papers for you that are going to be on this constantly changing thing that you can share with your colleagues as you guys are all talking about what the hell happens now. And we're going to keep producing our mini courses. Right now we're about to go live on gender. We're building some other ones as well around emotional intelligence and conflict management and things to kind of help us face this brave new world together as we all rebuild it.
All right. So we have a few minutes left for questions. We already have a couple questions in the Q&A that came in during the talk. So if anybody has a question, you can type it into there or into the chat box, and we'll be sure to get to it. But let's address these two questions in the Q&A. So the first question, both questions are from Cheryl. Thank you, Cheryl. First question from Cheryl. It seems like this may bring our globalized world back to more localized one, if not cyclically. Zoom is clearly being used to maintain current relationships, but what do you see as a solution for xenophobia for the next generation that may not get the same immersion experiences? Yeah, that's a really great question. And I mean, that's one of the things that like we can solve short-term problems a lot easier than we can solve these long-term ones. I don't know if you have an answer off the top of your head for that, Kristen. I've been muddling over.
I mean, I think it's, in some ways, I think Zoom is part of the answer, because I do think it offers an opportunity for things like classroom exchanges.
Yeah.
In a different way. Like I've got a friend who's teaching high school in France and they're all on lockdown right now. And she's moved all of her classes to Discord, which is a online, like live chat feature. And I've popped in on a couple of them as the native English speaker. And I answered some questions for them. So I think if with intentionality, that can be part of it. But in terms of immersion, I mean, there are certainly, like Cheryl, I think I know what you're talking about, but I don't know what the new immersion is going to look like. And I don't know that's going to be like a real generational question, I think, because how people perceive how their own countries handled this crisis versus how other countries handled it. The hierarchy is going to be, that's like a different flavor of xenophobia, especially for people who don't think their country handled it properly. That's going to be something we're going to have to keep an eye on, I think.
Yeah, I would like to see the continued use of this technology, and to hopefully have, I mean, it would be great, pie in the sky. It would be great to use that technology to have conversations and to get students to understand maybe what it was like in different parts of the world, to have a conversation with a different classroom about what their experiences were, to show them both that a lot of the experiences were the same, kind of the fear and the anxiety and the isolation and the uncertainty, but then also to learn some cross-cultural differences as well. So similarly to that, Cheryl's second question, how do we persuade the powers to be in institutions that this generational trauma is real and long lasting? Whew.
Well, we'll do a whole other webinar on that at another time.
Yeah.
Is my short answer to that, because that's the question that we're solving in Northern Ireland right now too, and we've got some resources, and so I don't want to give you a cheap answer. So we'll put together a whole webinar on that later.
Because that's a fantastic question, and it's really, really complicated, and it's not been done well in Northern Ireland at all. And
or
a lot of other
anywhere,
places,
to be completely frank.
Yeah, I was about to say, or any conflict zone, really. And so there's a lot of lessons to be learned from what not to do. But yeah, I think that sounds like a great webinar. So thanks for that question, Cheryl. Sorry to punt it off for another few weeks, but we'll get working on that because it's a really important question.
And then Allison wants to know, how do you balance the need to give yourself grace and space to breathe with the needs to maintain routines and fulfill commitments? Well, Allison.
Yes. My personal philosophy, I take every day as it comes. I thought, as a person who works remotely, that I wasn't going to struggle with this adjustment. And I was completely wrong. So I've had to rebuild my routines in a different way than I thought. And for me, it's every day. What does today look like? What are the things that have to get done today? Do they have to get done today? And if they do, how can I accomplish them? And I try and go between tasks that are important and that need done, and tasks that might, bring me intellectual stimulation or give me pause or give me a break. I know it's really, really difficult, especially when you have commitments that you have to fill. And for me, it's looking at it every day and what can I do every day to make sure that I give myself space for both of those things.
Yeah. And I am still, like I've said, I'm still going to work and I'm managing the same amount of people as I was before, and actually doing more because of some certain stuff within our business. I'm juggling a lot more than normal. And so for me, even there are days it breaks down to hour by hour. What can I do in the next hour that absolutely has to be done? And what can I give myself grace on? It's a lot of internal reflection and paying attention to both my body and my heart. If I start getting really, really shaky, I know for me, that means I haven't eaten recently and my anxiety is really high. And so paying attention to that and being intentional. And that is, I mean, it's a $64 million question right now, and that you articulated so brilliantly. And I think Allison and everyone else who has that question, this is one of those things in which we learn by doing. And we just have to keep at it. Here in the United States, we are keeping at it for at least another month. And we have not even the most restricted movement of people in the world. We know Ireland, Italy, and France are all on lockdown, which is a different thing than we have in the United States. So it's, we're going to figure it out as we go along, I think, to be honest. And I hope you can find peace in your own soul every day, even for a few minutes.
Yeah, I don't think I have a different answer to that, and I think talking about it, I would add I have found it really helpful if I'm struggling with that balance to bounce it off of somebody else, because then you can get another person saying, is this commitment, is this time restriction, is this routine really important? Is it helping you find balance, or is it putting additional pressure on you? Is it causing additional emotional, mental, or physical stress? It's a really important time to start practicing, if you haven't already, self-reflection and checking in with yourself. As Dr. Kristen said, pretty much all the time. And even if that is, checking in with yourself to realize, I need to check out right now. I watched 12 hours, I think, of Killing Eve this weekend, which was an excellent distraction and allowed me to check out, which was what I needed. And I'm sure next weekend will look different depending on what this week gives us.
I am playing so much Xbox right now, and video games are beautiful, immersive, wonderful experiences if that's part of your life. But so here's how, by the way, if you've got more questions, because we're out of time and we want to respect that, even though time means nothing right now, it still means something. So we want to thank you for joining us, and follow us on social media any of these ways. If you're watching this playback on our webinar, playback on our YouTube channel, you can always comment. Anyone who's joined us live, please feel free to get in touch with us at any of the places or the email that you RSVP'd to this for. And we look forward to hopefully you joining us next week, where we'll talk even more about the emotions and the mental health and the personal side of things, and dig into even a little bit more of some of the topics of the questions. So thanks, guys. Thanks for joining us.
All the best. Be safe and be well.